Hi, my friends. Today I want to present you a new story. Enjoy watching it.
The moonlight trickled through the tattered blinds of my bedroom, casting pale streaks across the floor. I lay on the thin mattress, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, my stomach gnawing with a familiar emptiness. My part-time job at the diner hadn't stretched far enough this week, and I'd had to choose between keeping the lights on or buying food. The dim glow of the overhead bulb proved which option had won. The front door slammed, shaking the walls, and I flinched instinctively. The muffled voices of my father and his new wife Jennifer floated up from downstairs. "You didn't tell me we were out of scotch." Jennifer's voice, sharp and grating, carried through the thin walls. "Well, you drank it all," my father snapped, his slurred speech betraying how much he'd already had tonight. I rolled onto my side, clutching my pillow to block out their argument. Jennifer had been in my life for less than a year, but it felt like decades. From the moment she moved in, she had commandeered the house, redecorating every room with cheap, gaudy furniture while systematically stripping away anything that reminded me of my mother. That's when I heard it, a distinct shuffle outside my bedroom door. My heart quickened, and I sat up, ears straining in the silence. The doorknob turned slowly, creaking as if to draw out my anxiety. The door opened just enough for Jennifer's face to appear, her lips curling into a smirk. "Still awake, I see," she sneered. "Good. We need to talk about rent." "Rent?" I echoed, stunned. "Don't play dumb," she said, stepping into the room. Her perfume, sickly sweet, filled the small space. "You're living here, aren't you? It's time you started pulling your weight." "I already do," I shot back, anger bubbling beneath my words. "I work after school, and half my paycheck already goes toward groceries." She laughed, a hollow sound that made my skin crawl. "Groceries? Please. That barely covers the milk I pour into my coffee." "Jennifer," my father's voice barked from the hallway. He appeared behind her, his tie loosened and eyes bloodshot. "Just let the boy be." Her head whipped toward him, her expression darkening. "Let him be. You coddle him, Kevin. That's why he's a freeloading brat now." "Enough." My father's voice rose, but it lacked conviction. He glanced at me briefly before retreating downstairs, leaving Jennifer victorious. She turned back to me, her smirk returning. "Rent's due Friday," she said, her tone mocking. "And don't even think about asking your daddy for help." As she disappeared, I exhaled, the tension in my chest refusing to ease. I had no idea how I'd come up with the money. But I knew one thing, Jennifer's demands would only grow worse. I reached into my backpack and pulled out my journal, the only place where my thoughts felt safe. As I began to write, the words poured out like a dam breaking. "This house isn't home. It's a prison, and every day feels like another stone sealing the inside." Downstairs, a crash echoed, followed by another shout from my father. My grip tightened on the pen. Whatever Jennifer wanted from me, I knew she wouldn't stop until she had wrung me dry. But this time, I wasn't sure if I had anything left to give. The morning light seeped into my room like an unwelcome guest, revealing the peeling wallpaper and dusty corners I preferred to ignore. The air was heavy with the faint smell of burnt toast drifting up from the kitchen. I dressed quickly, pulling on the same worn jeans I'd worn for days, and steeled myself for whatever fresh torment Jennifer had in store. As I descended the creaking stairs, her voice cut through the air like a blade. "Don't forget, rent's due tomorrow," she called from the living room. I didn't respond. I stepped into the kitchen, grabbed a slice of bread, and was about to leave when I heard her again. "Oh, and Kevin," she shouted, her tone dripping with disdain. "Tell your son he's not touching the good cereal. That's for people who actually pay their way." "Jennifer, lay off," my father mumbled, his words barely audible over the rustling of his newspaper. "Lay off?" she snapped, her heels clicking as she stormed into the kitchen. "He's 16, Kevin, 16, and he's still acting like this is some free ride." I clenched my fists and turned to leave, but she blocked the doorway. Her eyes scanned me like a predator sizing up its prey. "Where are you off to in such a hurry?" she demanded. "Work," I replied curtly, trying to sidestep her. "Work? Ah, you mean that pathetic diner job? Do you even make enough there to cover the milk you waste every morning?" "Jennifer, enough." My father's voice was louder this time, but his tone betrayed his exhaustion. Jennifer smirked, clearly relishing her power. "Fine, run along, little boy. But don't forget, tomorrow's the deadline. No money, no roof." I shoved past her and out the door, slamming it behind me. The cold morning air hit me like a slap, but I welcomed it. I needed the clarity. At work, the diner buzzed with its usual morning chaos. Customers shuffled in and out, their chatter blending with the clatter of dishes. I wiped down a table, trying to block out Jennifer's words. "Hey kid," my boss Gary called from behind the counter. "You've been quiet today. Everything all right?" I hesitated before nodding. "Yeah, just tired." Gary raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. He handed me an order slip. "Table 5. Get it while it's hot." I took the tray and weaved through the crowded floor, my thoughts elsewhere. That's when I felt it, a hand on my shoulder. I turned to see Mr. Bennett, one of our regulars, his face unusually serious. "Son," he said in a low voice, "I couldn't help but overhear last night when I was leaving. Sounded like trouble at home." I froze, the tray trembling in my hands. "I'm fine," I lied. Mr. Bennett studied me for a moment before nodding. "If you ever need help, you let me know. You've got potential, kid. Don't let anyone take that from you." His words lingered long after he left. As I worked, a plan began to form in my mind, sparked by his unexpected kindness. Maybe there was a way out, a way to reclaim the control Jennifer had stolen from me. By the time my shift ended, the idea had solidified. Tomorrow, when Jennifer demanded her so-called rent, I wouldn't just hand over the money. I would show her, and my father, that the crownless king of this house wasn't as powerless as they thought. For now, though, I walked home, my steps heavy but my resolve growing. As I reached the door, I hesitated, my hand hovering over the knob. I could hear them arguing inside, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of anger and spite. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open, ready to face whatever awaited me. "Ah, the prince returns," Jennifer sneered as I entered. "Now the refrigerator is on lockdown. That's the key and I'll only have it." I looked at the refrigerator. It was chained and fastened with a big metal lock. I felt uneasy. Her words were venomous, but this time they didn't cut as deep. A storm was brewing, and I was ready to stand in its eye. The next day dawned heavy with tension. The house was unusually quiet, but it wasn't the calm before the storm. It was the storm holding its breath. I moved carefully, avoiding Jennifer's path as I prepared for work. My heart raced in anticipation of the confrontation I knew was inevitable. "Kevin, you're not seriously going to let him skip out on rent, are you?" Jennifer's voice broke the silence as I stepped into the hallway. I froze, my hand halfway to my jacket. "He's got to contribute or he can find somewhere else to freeload," she continued, her tone sharp. "I'll talk to him," my father mumbled, but his words lacked conviction. I stepped into the living room, clutching the envelope containing my hard-earned pay. Jennifer turned to face me, a victorious smirk already forming. "Well, there he is," she said, crossing her arms. "Let's see it." I tossed the envelope onto the table between us. "There's your money. But this is the last time." Her smile faltered. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," I said, my voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. "I've been paying for things I don't even use while you treat me like dirt. It stops now." Jennifer's eyes narrowed. "Don't you dare talk to me like that in my house." "This isn't your house," I shot back, my frustration boiling over. "It's my father's, and last I checked, I'm his son, not your servant." My father shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Jennifer leaned forward, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You think you can justify me and walk away unscathed. You're nothing without this roof over your head." "Maybe," I said, meeting her gaze. "But I'm done being your punching bag." I turned and left the room, my hands shaking as I grabbed my bag and headed out the door. As I walked to work, the weight of what I'd just done settled over me. For the first time, I had stood up to her, but I knew there would be consequences. The diner was busier than usual, which gave me little time to dwell on the confrontation. The rest of the shift passed in a blur. By the time I clocked out, the sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the streets in muted shades of gray. When I opened the door, the house was dark except for the glow of the TV in the living room. Jennifer sat on the couch, her face illuminated by the flickering screen. She didn't look at me as I entered, but her words cut through the silence. "You're playing a dangerous game, boy." I didn't respond, heading straight to my room and locking the door behind me. For the first time, I felt the true weight of my isolation. But despite the fear curling in my stomach, one thought kept me grounded. I would not let her win. Tomorrow, I would find help. One way or another, these chains of obligation would be broken. The air in the house felt suffocating, thick with unspoken threats. My every move was shadowed by the weight of Jennifer's looming presence. As the days dragged on, her smug smirks and my father's complicit silence became unbearable. But I wasn't idle. Each evening after work, I meticulously gathered evidence, pay stubs, text messages, receipts, anything to prove the exploitation I had endured. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table, pretending to do homework, Jennifer's voice cut through the air like a blade. "You're awfully quiet these days," she said, leaning against the doorframe. Her tone was casual, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. "I've got nothing to say to you," I replied, not looking up. Jennifer chuckled, a low, sinister sound. "You think you're clever, don't you? Always scribbling in that notebook of yours, planning something." I forced myself to stay calm, my pen moving steadily across the page. "Just schoolwork." Her footsteps echoed as she moved closer. She snatched the notebook off the table, her eyes scanning the page. When she saw the list of transactions and dates, her face darkened. "What's this?" she hissed. "It's nothing," I said, reaching for the notebook, but she held it out of reach. "This looks a lot like you're keeping tabs on me." Her voice was laced with venom. Before I could respond, my father entered the room, a beer in hand. "What's going on here?" he asked, his tone weary. "Your son thinks he can spy on me," Jennifer snapped, waving the notebook in his face. I stood, my heart pounding. "I'm just keeping track of what I paid. You know, since I've been funding this household." My father's eyes flickered between us, his brows furrowing. "You don't need to keep records. We're family." "Family?" I scoffed, unable to contain the bitterness. "Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't treat one number like a cash machine." Jennifer slammed the notebook onto the table, her face twisted with fury. "You ungrateful little—" "That's enough," I interrupted, my voice louder than I intended. "I'm done being bullied by you. By both of you." My father set his beer down, his expression hardening. "You're out of line." "No," I said, standing my ground. "I've been quiet for too long. I've got proof of everything, what you've taken from me, how you've treated me. I've already talked to someone about it." Jennifer's face went pale for a moment before she recovered, her lips curling into a sneer. "Talk to someone? Who?" "You're bluffing." "Try me," I said, meeting her gaze. The room fell silent, tension crackling like static electricity. I grabbed my notebook and walked past them, my hands trembling but my resolve steady. In my desperation, I called my estranged mother. Her voice, soft but strained, answered after a long silence. "It's been a long time," she said. I told her everything. The hunger, the abuse, the stolen money. She went quiet for a moment before revealing something that made my blood run cold. She'd been sending child support payments for years, payments my father had hidden. "He's been cashing the checks," she said. "You were supposed to have everything you needed." Rage bubbled up inside me, white hot and all-consuming. I decided then and there that I wouldn't endure their abuse any longer. The morning air was brittle as I dialed the lawyer's office. My hand trembled, but it wasn't fear. It was the weight of change pressing on my chest. A kind, professional voice answered, and within minutes, I was pouring out my story to Attorney Bennett, a no-nonsense advocate with a reputation for exposing fraud and abuse. By the time our call ended, I felt an ember of hope flicker inside me. That evening, Jennifer noticed my demeanor had shifted. "You seem different," she said, eyeing me suspiciously as I cleared the dinner table. "Do I?" I replied, suppressing a smile. The next day, I met Attorney Bennett in her office. We sat across a sturdy oak desk laden with files. She pushed her glasses higher on her nose, scanning my notes and the pile of evidence I'd brought. "This is solid," she said, her tone brisk. "We can take this to court, but we'll need to act quickly. First, I'll send a formal notice of investigation." "What happens next?" I asked, gripping the edge of my chair. Bennett leaned forward. "They'll either fold or fight. Prepare for the latter." I left her office feeling both exhilarated and terrified. The die was cast. Jennifer and my father received their formal notice on a stormy afternoon. The knock at the door was loud and authoritative. When Jennifer opened it to find a process server, her face contorted in fury. She thrust the papers at my father, who stood frozen in the doorway. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice rising. I watched from the staircase, heart hammering in my chest. "It's justice," I said, stepping into view. "You little snake." Jennifer spat, advancing toward me. "Stop," my father barked, his voice cracking. He turned to me, his expression conflicted. "What are you doing?" "What I should have done a long time ago," I said firmly, standing up for myself. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as the case was called. Jennifer and my father sat stiffly at the defendant's table, while Attorney Bennett and I took our places on the opposite side. The judge, a stern woman with piercing eyes, called the room to order. Bennett began with a commanding opening statement, detailing the financial and emotional violence I had endured. She presented evidence meticulously, each document and testimony painting a clear picture of exploitation. "Do you deny these transactions?" Ben asked Jennifer during cross-examination, sliding a stack of bank statements toward her. Jennifer's face reddened. "I was managing household finances." "By confiscating a minor's income?" Bennett's tone was razor-sharp. My father was next. When asked why he allowed Jennifer's behavior, he stammered, "I didn't realize it was that bad." I couldn't help but interject. "You knew, you just didn't care." The judge silenced the room with a single tap of her gavel. "We will have order," she said, but her gaze lingered on my father, heavy with disapproval. The turning point came when my mother testified. She recounted how my father had lied to her, claiming he was using the child support money for my education and well-being. When the verdict was announced, the room held its breath. The judge's voice was steady and unyielding. "The defendants are found guilty of financial exploitation and neglect. Restitution will be made to the plaintiff, and further penalties will be determined." Jennifer's face crumpled, while my father slumped in his chair. I felt a swell of relief, but it was bittersweet. They would face consequences, but the damage they'd done could never be undone. I packed my belongings the next morning. As I carried the last box to my car, my father appeared on the porch. "Where will you go?" he asked, his voice subdued. "Somewhere far from here," I replied without looking back. Jennifer didn't emerge, and I didn't care to see her again. I drove away with the windows down, the weight of the past lifting with each mile. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of control over my life.
Friends, what do you think of this story? Write your opinion in the comments. Would you like more stories? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button so you don't miss any videos. See you tomorrow.